This week on Hope City Overtime, we take a look at Wake the Dead. This is an incredible series that we began this Sunday, and I'm joined with 3 of our communicators to break this thing down. This is one you're going to want to like and subscribe. Let's get it.
Welcome to Hope City Overtime, a weekly podcast where we take a little more time to dive into Sunday's message. And I'm really excited. You may have noticed we have more people than usual today. Shout out to Dom, who had to set up the different camera angles to fit 4 people in. Because we don't even have everyone who preached on Sunday here with us today. It was a cool kickoff to a series, got a lot of communicators up on stage preaching the word. And I am so excited about this Wake the Dead series. And so I'm going to actually start with you, John. Surprise. How did this series kind of come about in you for this to be our next big direction that we go as a church?
Yeah, so recently, a good friend of mine who has a church in the area, shout out Pastor Wes in the Berg, called me up and asked me if I would do one of their revival nights, which I had a phenomenal time doing. And in anticipation and preparing for that moment and in prayer, just felt compelled to the story of Lazarus. Figured it was just for that night, and the Lord had a word for those people, and it was exciting, a great time. And the moment I got off the stage, driving home in my car, we use a phrase here all the time that the barometer of preaching is whether or not it's gotten out of your gut, right? So the preparation process is regurgitating what you feel like God is saying, doing the preparation work to pull that word together. And then on Sunday morning, when you get a chance to preach, it's like getting it all out, right? I just felt like this word wasn't done. So began to pray and kind of ask the Lord for some direction. And we knew we had a series coming up that we kind of need to step fully into. We were in the middle of our Shape series and just started praying, and the Lord kind of led me to this idea of waking the dead, not just in the story of Lazarus, but then I began researching all of the instances of resurrection in Scripture and really just felt this theme of, if there's something we're called to do, this is it, right? I think people are looking to know why the church. I think that's a big question in 2025. Why should I be engaged in community? What's the purpose of this community? If you take a church out of a community, what's that community lose? And I do think that the call of the church is to wake the dead. And when you pull a church out of a community, what you get is a community full of the walking dead. So that's really what kind of compelled this and what the Lord started speaking into me.
I love that, even though it makes me think of zombies every time you say The Walking Dead. And I've never even seen the show. You all kind of talked about ways that we maybe have missed this call or misunderstood what it means to wake the dead. Anyone can jump in now. It doesn't just have to be Pastor John. But what are some of the ways that maybe the church has watered down this call to wake the dead that you've kind of observed?
Yeah, I know for me, I think the one thing that really hit me kind of in that realm was that we live with death all week long. Maybe our job's not going the way we want it or whatever. And we're okay to just survive through it. We'll medicate however we need to medicate. And as long as we show up on Sunday and, like we said, your makeup is all done, you got your suit and tie, the kids are dressed, like, we're like, okay, I'm all right. And it's got to be more. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That can't be just the end of it. There's got to be more.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's still a lot of people in the faith that believe the works that Jesus did was only for that time. So they don't even have the faith to really believe that God can bring the life that we so desperately need. So I think of that group, and to Justin's point, how easy it is for us to live life that way with such defeat. We tell people, this is who you need, this is what you need, but if they look at our lives and our lives is not that much better than theirs, why do they need then what we have?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of sad to see that really just out and about in so many different circles of faith.
Yeah. I feel like I can buy into that line of thinking that almost becomes more self-help than Wake the Dead. And like that line that I know we've said it a lot, that God didn't come to make bad things good or to make good things better. He came to wake the dead. I think I can sometimes like sell out for this kind of TED Talk, self-help.
Yeah.
Let me see what the Apostle Paul says. And then if I follow these instructions, like it still is somehow on me to just try to get better versus this idea of Jesus changing everything. And I think some of it has to do with the time in our lives when we're saved also, because I can't remember. So I know you talked about a moment, actually all of you, I'm just going to be like, all of you talked about a moment, like remembering a moment in your life and what it was like to be dead. And I can't remember a time in my life before Jesus, even though I can totally point to his transformation over time. So I wonder, that's just me throwing out extra stuff that I didn't put in my notes. If some of that impacts our understanding of what it means to see the dead come to life, when it's like, my mom remembers the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's challenging, I think, for a couple reasons. I think reason number one, raising the dead requires a level of messiness that we don't want to deal with no more as a church. So many times we feel like the objective is to comfort people into the kingdom. And what I mean by that is, like, hear me, we are big believers in the minute you walk through the doors of your family, right? Like we say that all the time. So when people are exploring the faith or navigating seasons where they're trying to figure out their faith journey, we're good with that. Like I understand that. But with that said, there is a moment where you have to come to the realization of the ugliness of sin.
Yeah.
So what we have done in order to make people more comfortable is we've started to ignore the nuances of sin, right? Like, so we either ignore it altogether. We don't talk about sin here. We only talk about love. Even in my conversations with other people, we don't address sin. We only, this is only love. And we've walked through, like, if you want some depth in this conversation, like that walkthrough we did at James a couple of years back. Like, it is not love if it's not full truth.
Yeah.
And a portion of that truth is
good.
all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And we all have to deal. If you're coming to Jesus just because it makes life more comfortable, I don't think you're coming to Jesus at all, right? Like, the coming to Jesus is a product of understanding that I am a sinned and I am a flawed person in need of rescue. And so because we don't handle that well, we either ignore it, we try to justify it. So there's that conversation that you hear around a lot of circles that's like, well, it's okay, everyone's doing it today. It's not that big of a deal. When it comes to sin, no matter what it is, it's a big deal, regardless what that sin is. And again, we like to pick and choose our favorite sins and the ones that we agree with more or less. And then the third thing we do with sin is what's gotten even scarier is today what we've tried to do is we embrace it fully. So sin becomes, well, I was born like this. I was wired like this. I heard a conversation this week even about somebody just making this argument for infidelity in marriage. Well, we're not wired to be people who are faithful. And it was just stomach turning to see the way that we have allowed sin now to become a part of our identity. And this thing that we know doesn't honor God, is not good for human flourishing, leads to death and disaster across the board, the death of families, the death of relationships, the breaking of hearts. All of these things on top of the fact that it, again, is not pleasing to the Lord, but we've identified that now as this thing that we just wired to. So there's no excuse. We just, we're okay with it. I think ultimately those things are the reason why so many churches have settled for, this isn't a church that wakes the dead. This is a church that makes people comfortable. And those are two different things.
You talked about the life that Jesus offers. And it is important, like when we're talking about waking the dead, what life looks like. And that John 10:10 passage, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came that you could have life and have it to the fullest is the way I memorized it. I know you brought that one up. Life abundant. The NLT was a different translation, but I can't remember.
Have it to the full.
Oh, it was a different one on the screen on Sunday, but
It was NIV.
oh, okay, whatever it was,
Yeah.
something similar to full life, abundant life, and to your point, I want to talk about what the difference is between safety or a comfortable life and a full life. How have you experienced life to the full in your own walk with God that might not look like comfort or safety culturally?
That's a great question. For me, it's been that life to the full is life that's full. There's seasons of risk and discomfort in order for God to complete his ultimate purpose. So life fully is, the way that I look at it, is you were designed with a specific intention in mind. A purpose is the phrase that we use here all the time. And in order to fully live in that purpose is to live life fully. And that means that there are seasons where I have to say no to things that I want to say yes to. I have to I have to do some things that I don't want to do. Paul talks about that constantly. Like, that's the constant tension in me, that I learn how to invest in the things of the spirit and learn how to eliminate the things of the flesh. But when you get to that point where you're living in that space, again, there's a difference between, if the objective is comfort, then I'm not sure that you're always doing the thing that God has called you to do.
Yeah.
Whereas if the objective is obedience, then I'm fully living in the call that he has, or the life that he has for me. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, I mean, it talks about it. I was kind of looking for actual personal examples too, but I also want to hit on, I think you were the one who talked a lot about this idea of safety. Like, sometimes we go towards comfort, but sometimes that we think we're coming to Jesus because we want him to protect us or to protect our kids. I think that's even a more difficult thing to think about than our own selves.
Yeah.
How is full life different than safe life? It makes me think of Aslan, in the Chronicles of Narnia, where they're like, safe? Who said he was safe, but he's good?
Yeah. Yeah. Good night. I've learned that I personally feel most alive when I'm walking in faith. That faith oftentimes takes me to a place where I may use the word risk, but there really is no risk in it. But I feel the risk. When I choose to try to live a life that feels safe, predictable, I've discovered that my life at that moment feels the most bland and dull. Like, my faith is almost boring to me. Now, I'm not an adrenaline junkie by no means, but I realize I've watched and witnessed myself that I feel most alive when I'm actually taking steps of faith because I'm right in his will. I've discovered in my attempts to build safety and make my plans clear as day for me that just life becomes mundane. And that's when I discovered that he's called me to walk in faith in every season, and that's when I truly feel full. That's when I truly feel alive. So when I was in the Charlotte transition for those 2 years, there was a lot of tension. There was a lot of conversations I had with people. I was frustrated. But prior to, I was just in this place where I was kind of like in the lazy river. And I was getting so frustrated with just everything. Everything set me off because I was in a place that was safe, comfortable, but it was not bringing the things that he had in me out. So,
Yeah, that's good.
yeah, we need the tension. The tension is a good thing. That's when growth occurs, is when you feel that those pain and the tension.
it is funny. I think so much of this is the tension that's created when people live life according to cultural standards versus biblical standards, right? Like, so there's been times where in my life I'm making career choices and people are asking questions like, where's the money line up? Now, I think it's ignorance to not consider where the money lines up, but for children of God, when we're hearing the voice of God clearly, that's really low on the priority list. Specifically, is it, again, career choices, family choices? Like, I know that there's some people who have maybe struggled with natural family and choosing adoption versus giving birth naturally, or adopting even after having children. Like, there's a choice that might not make sense to the culture. Well, you have your kids, your money's good, Now
Yeah.
to bring up, like, this is an extra expense. This doesn't make sense. And I think that phrase, it doesn't make sense. The question I always have is to who? Like, does this make sense according to cultural norms? Because I'm not interested. But if what I'm trying my hardest to do is to make sure that I'm being obedient to the voice of God and living in that place where I trust Him fully. Because I do think John said, it's not that risk because I trust in God, right? So like that word risk, but it does flip because the risk is that I don't obey God. Like the flip of that is that I'm not walking in His will. Now I know the sovereignty, grace, and love of God, who always, even when I mess up, is right there. But still, I want to live in that fullness, and it does require that obedience.
Yeah. What about you?
Oh, hi.
Well, hello.
Funny enough, I when you asked the question, my mind just kind of immediately went back to, and I'm glad you said practical, because my mind went super practical. And not to play the advertisement here, but I think the moments in my life where I felt the most full and the most fulfillment has been when we've been in a great community of believers. And you see the needs pop up where, so-and-so has a need with a family member. And, as a group, we begin to pray and we see God meet that need. You call up. I remember with our home group, at one point we were moving. And we literally kind of came across the clock where it was like, we need to be out of this house by like 6 o'clock or whatever, And here it is like 4:30 and I got a ton of stuff. And I call some of the people in that group and they're there. And within minutes, we've got this whole thing taken care of. And I know that's not really, again, from that high spiritual level, but yet at the same time, it's that fullness of the community.
Yeah.
And the importance of groups and being
absolutely.
part of.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I think finances are a big one for me when I just think about where are the places that I make choices that a lot of people would be like, that's foolish. And that doesn't even just have to be the times when it was like ministry paychecks, like generosity, just a lot of different things that, and then there's that tension, but always when when I can remind myself, like, you're not the one who provides for yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's a lie that we're the ones who supply everything that we need. God supplies what we need, that fullness of life comes. And then to your point, I was thinking about community too. Like, I have a group of friends that a year ago, we happened to get together and take a picture. And then a week ago, we got together again. It was the first time everyone had been able to be together in the same room at the same time after a year that was not even just chaotic, like it was a year of suffering for some of the people in this group. And I got all sentimental in our group chat afterwards and like compared the pictures because we took a picture together this time too. But if you look at our faces, you can tell that there's more peace and more joy in the second picture than in the first picture. I mean, there was peace and joy there too. But even though the circumstances, if you looked at a lot of these people's lives, you'd be like, they're not in as good a spot as they were a year ago. But something about walking with God, even through suffering, doing it together, being committed to that, just encouraging each other towards God, you do see a fullness of life. Yeah. Even though if you actually put on paper, like what people's job situation was, what their family situation was, you would argue that like maybe they're worse off today than they were a year ago.
Those circumstances don't always dictate the reality.
Yeah.
Well, again, unless you're walking according to the world standard.
Yeah.
Right? If you're walking according to the world standard, the world would say you have to do the right thing in order to experience that peace and joy and hope. Like that's all based off of your ability to kind of navigate these decisions and make the right ones. Whereas we know that peace and joy are a product of lives that surrender to Him. So now my goal is to live surrendered to Him, regardless what that looks like to me or to other people, because He is the source.
So we talk about hope and purpose all the time. So if you're watching this for the first time, welcome to Hope City. We talk about how God calls us to bring hope to the broken and purpose to everyone. And so I would kind of argue this hope is tied to this fullness of life, like to our own resurrection, to that life that Jesus gives. But then I think a lot of this Wake the Dead series is really talking about what that purpose is that God has for everyone. So, bringing up stuff that you talked about yesterday, How would you define that purpose for followers of Jesus?
I mean, what we say within the scope of our community is our purpose is ultimately that his name is lifted up and showcased to the world, right? So in Paul's writings, he talks about the giftings of the believers and that ultimately the objective is to fill the universe with the image of Jesus. So when I'm living fully in the giftings that he has for me, when I'm accomplishing the purpose that he's designed for me, Jesus is seen. He's seen in the way that we utilize those gifts. He's seen in the way that we love one another, according to John, right? According to Jesus, even that they will know you by how you love one another. They will know me by how you love one another. So again, I think the giftings are unique. The circumstances are unique. The life journey is unique, but ultimately the purpose is not. The purpose is that he's elevated and lifted up. So even in this Wake the Dead series, the objective is to elevate Jesus, that he's the one, that it's his voice that wakes the dead, right? So that would be my hope in this, that people would discover at the end of this. Because I do think that we spend quite a bit of time telling, oh, you're gifted and God's wired you for purpose. That's beautiful. But if you don't know the why, like, why am I gifted? Why did he wire me for purpose? Why did he put me in this place at this time for this season? And it's to raise the dead.
Yeah.
Now the stakes have just gone up,
Yeah.
right? Now I'm not, to Justin's point Sunday, I'm not praying that somebody else will come. I'm living fully in the gifting that God has in me to call death, or call life out of dead places in the life of our family, friends, and coworkers and neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we actually do that? Like, I mean, I know Jesus stood at a tomb and yelled. Great job yelling yesterday, by the way. I've already told you that off camera, both of you. Yelled to Lazarus to come out. But how do we do that in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods? Because I don't know about you guys, but I think my neighbors would like call the HOA or something if I started standing at the door and like,
Susan,
come out.
come alive! Yeah, that'd be amazing.
I think it's just in the most practical way. If we've experienced that life that he came to give us to the full, then we bring them into our circle of life. We allow them to experience what life feels like, even the dynamic in our conversations and the way we look at life. They can be like, man, I can't believe all this is going on, but the life that I bring sees the positive and the hope in the despair that they only see. So even when they're in a dire need, I come in bringing life to help them. I bring them around my family so they could see a healthy family dynamic and people that are real. Do my kids always get along? No, but at the end of the day, as small as it is, my kids almost every night, definitely my son always will go and to each of his sister's room will tell them, I love you. Good night. Like,
That's
I never
awesome.
did that growing up. I felt so uncomfortable. I am so blessed to be able to see all of them saying it to each other, and not in a joyful way, but like, I'll stop. Good night. I love you. I love you. I think just to bring them alongside you and let that life that you have rub off on them.
Yeah, it's good. That's good.
Yeah, I feel like we spent a lot of time yesterday really pinpointing Jesus being the source of life. And for me, when I look at that practical side of it, it's in my everyday, am I doing things that point people to Jesus, not just like as the Savior, but as the source?
Yeah.
Like, I have a tendency, we were talking about this last night with our students about I'm a fixer by nature. And so I see something, I want to fix it. But also now tying that back to Jesus, going, but what does he want? And what is he telling me? Where's he leading me? And I know that sounds like a simple thing. We talk about something in a
I think that's
simplistic
huge.
form.
Yeah.
But when you think about it with your friends, you think about with your coworkers, your family, and things like that, I think we see a situation, we go like, oh man, my sister's doing this, and I should step in and say something. But it's like, okay, but what's God telling you to say? What's the Holy Spirit leading you into versus, oh, she's doing something stupid, and I just want to, correct it. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think how you live your life matters. It's one of the dangers of this isolation theology that says, I don't want people too close to my family because, somehow they're going to destroy or and again, everything within reason and boundaries. But I do think that some of that isolation theology that we've seen develop over the last 20 years of, hey, we're going to create these Christian bubbles where everybody kind of, we know everybody who walks through the door. They're already all clean and set. No one thinks differently than us. Like, ultimately, what's at stake is the Christian witness. Like, there should be points here where we're loving our neighbor. And I'm not saying, I hate that phrase has been hijacked to this 2,000 foot place versus the guy who actually lives next to you is your neighbor. And what does it mean to notice that his grass is too high and you got the lawnmower out and you decide to spend an extra moment cutting their grass? Or you notice, like, a couple months back, we got a new neighbor, and I literally just happened to be raking my front yard while she was raking her front yard, and I finished mine and walked over and started raking, and we had this incredible conversation about her life and where she's from, and then she found out, that I'm a believer, and I didn't have to have a theological framework to prove. I didn't have a 4-point sermon. It literally was just a moment of exchanging love, right? Like, this is an act of love because of who has loved me. And I think ultimately the more we learn to do that, again, it's really easy to sit on the side and point fingers and complain about all your wayward neighbors and complain about your coworkers, and that's burying wounded people.
Yeah.
Versus doing what we're called to do and showcase light in dark places. That's why, for me, it was Greg and Essie Del Valle inviting me into their home when not everything was perfect, but I saw it, right? That's Billy and Shay Cole taking chances on me, inviting me around their living room table to play board games with a couple friends, even though I ruined their curtain because I dropped a 2-liter of soda on the floor and it just blew up, and Shay was so upset, but yet so loving. As silly as that sounds, showcasing the grace of the Lord in those moments. Like, I can point to people after people who just rejected that isolation mentality and were willing to love anybody and everybody at all costs. And I think that that's critical to the Christian faith. That's what it means. No, we're not standing up at people's doors in your HOA and screaming, "Come alive." But when Susan walks in after a tough day on a Friday and she meets Ashley at the mailbox, the smile, the loving, "Hey, you good?" The 2-minute, "Is there something I can help you pray for?" Or even the greeting of love and remembering her name. Like, you would be amazed how that screams just as loud as Jesus at Lazarus's tomb.
Yeah. This is not related, but kind of related. I heard a speaker years ago. I don't remember his book, but it had something to do with being a good neighbor. And there was a giveaway that was a refrigerator magnet that was like whiteboard with a pen. And it had like a little picture of your house in the middle, and then basically like across the street and next door, and place to write the neighbors' names. And it never totally worked for me because I've always lived in an apartment. But I still have that. I don't have it on my fridge anymore because my neighbors come over, and I feel like it would be creepy if they were to see. Like,
what's my name doing on
but
here?
the minute I learn a neighbor's name, I write it on that, and it's in my office. And because, like, I had never thought about it before the speaker. And to your point, sometimes that's a way to show life, is like,
Absolutely.
You're valuable enough that if you tell me your name once in passing, I'm going to do work to remember it so that I can greet you by name. Not because I'm special, but because Jesus knows your name. Like, Jesus loves you. So I want to love you because I love him a whole lot, you know?
Yeah, I have a funny story. We have a list similar like that with just people that we pray for as a family. We just have a list that Jess put together and put it on one of our walls in one of our side rooms. And we had one of those people over the house, and they had to use the restroom, so they walked through that secondary room that we have, and they saw their name, and they were just floored. They just couldn't stop. Like, do you guys really pray for us like that? I'm like, no, absolutely. So I think even then is just an opportunity to showcase that there is a love that's deeper than what they're experiencing. To John's point, like, they need to see that there's a difference. And when they ask the question, so this is the critical part, because to love without an answer can be to some degree damaging.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to know the answer so that when they ask, we're not afraid to say, we love like this because we've been loved like this.
Yeah.
And it's King Jesus. Like, this is what he's called us to. And that's the part where we get to scream into the grave.
Yeah. I love that. Although I have an actual neighbor who's already alive. Her name's Suzanne. If you go to West, you
Come
probably
on.
know her. If you go to North, you might know her by
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
But she's my neighbor, and I do kind of want to go to her house and be like, Suzanne, come alive.
Yeah. I love it.
So we talked about the Lazarus story, and we talked about something that I don't think about a lot. I think, to your point and maybe Emma's point, I think about Jesus being angry when he flipped the tables at the temple. But maybe you're the expert because you love angry Jesus, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
you love it.
It was awesome.
It says that he was deeply angered when he got to the tomb and the people were wailing and weeping. And I want to talk about why, because if you just kind of read that, it doesn't make sense that he would be deeply angry. Someone died and people were wailing at the grave. Why did that make Jesus so angry?
Well, there's a couple things culturally that we can read into this if you do a little bit of study. You have those who legitimately mourn, and Scripture's clear, like, blessed are those who mourn, right? Like, that's a part of the process. And then you have what some would call professional mourners. Like, so this is a practice that was celebrated. If you died or a loved one died, they would actually spend money on
This is
people.
still a practice in places where I've lived. Yeah.
Spend money on people to come and actually lift their voice and wail and do this outward show. We're not totally sure what all is happening. What we do know is that what angers him seemed to be that they were prematurely celebrating the death of Lazarus. Now, they didn't know it was premature. So I don't know, it's the way that we phrase it, and I'll stand on this. I do believe if you want to get Jesus angry, bury people.
Yeah.
Like that. If you want to get Jesus upset, just spend your life burying people. And I could argue theologically that that's one of those things that deeply angers the Lord. So in this picture, I do think what we're seeing is him responding to mourning that's done out of turn. That's now, again, I think it's a challenge because really he's the only one that knows. Like,
Yeah.
he's the only one in the moment that knows, no, this is worthless because what's about to happen. And I think maybe even, I don't know. It's one of those challenging passages because he does allude. Like, the word gets back. I promise you, the word got back to Mary and Martha that Jesus said he'll be there when he be there. This is not going to end in death.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a part here where I think some of the expectation was, where's the faith? So I think that's what deeply angered him, was that death had been celebrated, and that's not what was supposed to be happening. So
Yeah, because he calls a shot at the beginning
Right
of
at
the
the
story. Because you're right, he says, "This will not end in death," and you're right. I can't imagine that if they're all friends, they're all family, they go to the same.
yeah,
They go to the same group. They are in the basketball group or whatever together, and Jesus says, "Yeah, I'll be there in a few days."
That would make me angry. I'm not
Right?
going to lie.
Right?
I was thinking about that.
So, John, I think you're dead on that. That, like, he's looking at it going, y'all say y'all believe in me. You say that you're trusting in me. Yet I'm telling you, it's fine. And here you are.
it's a challenge, man.
It is a challenge. Because I even think, like, how many times have I maybe in prayer been asking Jesus to speak into a situation or a person and then given up because I feel like it got to the point, like death, like, well, now there's nothing that you can do, God. And he might be 2 days away from showing up for a miracle, but I'm over here throwing in the towel. Like, why weren't you here?
Yeah,
It's a challenge.
It's tough because, again, there's a trust in what he said.
Yeah.
And he said that this was going to happen. He said this wouldn't end in death. And yet where he finds them is celebrating death.
Yeah. So what does it look like, again, because we're not all going and burying people in actual graves, what does it look like today for people to bury people too soon?
Oh man.
That's an easy one almost.
Let's dive in.
Yeah, I think the phrase "if you're breathing, it's not too late." Specifically in this area of spiritual death, when it comes to so many people, I can't tell you how many times the prayer request is, "Hey, pray for my son or daughter, man. They're just so far from the faith. I'm not sure it's ever going to turn." Well, I mean, that's a phrase that communicates to some degree there's been some burying. I think when our attitude and heart doesn't leave space for the miracle, we've buried people. So that can look like gossip. That can look like slander. That can look like, that isolation culture where it's like, no, you don't meet our standard, and there's no way that God's ever going to bring the type of shifting. Like, that's the type of thing that I think is indicative of burying people. Yeah.
I think when you dismiss people, when you write them off, when in your book, they're dead to me, like literally, like I ain't messing with them ever
Yeah, I
again.
remember you saying that, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that might be where that phrase came from." Like, yeah,
You're dead to
we
me.
can't do that.
Yeah.
Like,
No.
It's easy to get there though. It's so frustrated sometimes with people. I think even out of love and hope, and you see them keep making the same mistakes. I'm like, bro, do you know how many times I told the Lord I'll never do this again? And I still did it in a moment of weakness. Like, God forbid he let go of me or someone else that was still trying to encourage me through it.
Yeah.
They weren't patient with me through that process where I would be. So I think we just got to remind ourselves the countless times people gave us and the
Yeah.
Lord gave us so that we're not so quick to just want to dismiss people and be done with them.
I know for me, like, and I mean, I'll be honest, I really struggle with this a lot too, is that picture that, someone shows up into our lives after they've met Jesus, and it's like in our minds, we create like, okay, they're a Christian, they're following God, they're going after everything. And there's almost like this mindset of like, not perfection, but they're good to go. And then they let us down. And now it's but you knew better.
Yeah.
You knew not to fall into that trap. You're supposed to be praying and reading. And now you become dead to me. Not because you sinned, it's because you should have known better. Yeah. And that's when I struggle with, because even still it's like, but Jesus still loves them the same.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that brings up a great point of where we're going. Like, there's this moment where Jesus calls Lazarus out of the grave. I think we would all stand here and be like, we can say wake the dead, and we're people who wake the dead, but what we really are people who point people to Jesus, and he's the one who wakes the dead.
Yeah.
Then he looks at the people who have been weeping and wailing around the gravesite, and he tells them to unwrap Lazarus and let him go. And to your point, I think a lot of the messiness of our work, it's not this moment of they were dead and then they're alive and they're perfect and sin's not a struggle anymore. Like, I can speak for myself. Sin is still very much a struggle in my life. What does it mean to unwrap people's grave clothes?
It means messy.
Yeah.
Someone gets saved that is walked through seasons of brokenness, and you're dealing with the aftermath of that shattering and the scars of those seasons. So, the man who walks in that has addictions, that has been divorced, that's on his, third and fourth marriage and trying to figure out relationships with his kids, like, it's messy. To the woman who's been single and navigating bad relationships over the last 15 years, and every other person was going to be the one to carry the weight and the scars and the wrappings of years and years of this is the one, this is the one, this is the one, to then finally find the one who does complete us in Jesus. In a moment, there's salvation, but then the process of sanctification and the journey of discipleship requires gentle people with loving hearts to slowly but surely unwrap what's been wrapped for years. And the objective of the wraps is to cover up the stench of death. So, like, we're still smelling some of the nuances of that, and it gets messy, but that's the church that we are called to be.
Yeah. I think of just the weight that comes with that.
Yeah.
We find, and it was a point we made, like not getting comfortable with death. Like, I think we have to remind ourselves, like, they've lived that way for so long. It's so easy for them to find comfort in that pain. You see people that have been incarcerated, they found more comfort back in the prison cell than actually experiencing the freedom. We see that with Moses, with the Israelites. Like, they're finally free, and what are they saying? Man, it was better off we were staying in captivity.
Yeah.
We can grow comfortable with death, and that's going to be hard for us and weighty for us to give people the patience to wrestle through that, because you want to just be so quick to just be like, no, you'll find way more here and there. But they've been in this state for so long, they know it. They know what it feels like. We just got to give people the grace to help them unwrap those clothes, even at times when they want to put their hands back on and start doing it again. Understanding is part of the process of it all.
I think it's critical to also remember we too were wrapped and still struggle.
Yeah.
Like, I think sometimes we do get to this point where it's like, oh, all I deal with is dead people. Well, you also deal with some of that. And somebody was willing to do that with you. And, you know, again, I can point to countless people who...
Jump into my last question.
Yeah, sorry.
I was like, look at that. Great minds
look
think
at
alike.
God.
Because I do want to spend a moment as we kind of wrap up the conversation talking about who in your life has helped unwrap your grave clothes. And I know some of you shared that on stage, some of you didn't. But since you were getting ready to do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a list. Sunday, I talked about Billy and Shay Cole. I've talked about them often. Just monumental. And even to this day, I call Billy in seasons like of big questions and struggles. Like, Billy Cole's a go-to. But specifically as a 15, 16-year-old kid trying to figure out my faith journey, he was one of the ones that did a lot of the work of removing those grave clothes. Curtis Cook, the youth pastor before Billy, who was really close to Jess and I. Jess actually babysat his kids. We'd play water basketball all the time. Great dude, love him to death. Was very instrumental in my discipleship and development. Greg and Essie DeValle, Raymond Hernandez and Christine Hernandez. Ernie and Melissa. I can go down the list of these incredible men and women who are part of the journey. And then I am blessed to come from a deep lineage. I pray to God that this is my kid's story too, but like my parents played a phenomenal role in helping me even after I came to the Lord. I would argue that the reason why my journey of the faith was what it was because my parents submitted to so much foundation in my life that the moment I said yes to Jesus, there was a process that I knew I would have to walk through because they modeled that for me. So mom and dad were huge. And so again, as that journey continued at a young age, there was so many people that were instrumental in that process.
Yeah, that's good. Who else?
I would say my father played a big role in it. It's funny, and this is to my fault, because I'm always so closed off, I really didn't give a lot of people space to be that for me. When I struggled, I struggled in silence. I just suffered in silence. When I did open up, someone like my father, what my father tended to do is, and my father was by far perfect, but what he did was he removed from me the authority that I felt sin had over me by reminding me where my life comes from and not putting so much emphasis on my mistakes and the grace and the love that the Lord gives us. And that just helped me to really let go of those things rather than be defined by it. Because my father had made so many mistakes. I mean, he was alcohol was a huge part, cigarettes, and I'm not saying cigarettes was a sin, but he had his addictions. He was in, at that time, his second marriage, and then I went through a season where he was in his third marriage, and I still saw the love for the Lord, and never once was his heart hardened to the Lord, even though he wished he was able to serve more in the context of his calling. He was always able to be like, this is on me, and Lord, this is none of the Lord's doing, me not being able to be where I want to be serving. I still have opportunities, but it's not where I wanted to be. To be able to see someone model that much failure and still have such a pure love for the Lord, it just helped me to not elevate sin and its hold over me, and look to the Lord for the life that I needed. So he played a huge role in just changing my mindset with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I kind of feel really, I think hitting off what you just said, like for me, a lot of negative experiences have helped push me towards people to pull that positive forward. So while I might not have a Billy Cole or someone super specific, and there are those people in my life, there's the Mike Fields, the Kyle Russellbergs, even my wife, who is incredible, like seeing the experiences that other people have gone through and gone, I don't want to be like that. I don't want that. And then God directing people into my life to help pull me away from those circumstances. I feel like that's been some of the most pivotal stuff for me.
Yeah. I think of my parents too. But I also think of a camp counselor who so I became a Christian at a summer camp. And that was kind of like, growing up, I didn't have a lot of Christian friends, had a great family, but always summer at Camp Greystone was the time where it was like, now I'm going to be with my camp friends and we're going to read the Bible together and we're going to encourage each other. And then we didn't have cell phones or email even, like, so we would write letters during the year, but like that was the time that we would see each other, but we were still dumb kids too. And I remember this one counselor, her name was Gina. She was the first person who ever noticed a call to ministry on my life or said something about it, which I think is part of unwrapping grave clothes, is actually like calling out those gifts that you see in people, calling out that identity that's not defined by those grave clothes. But she was also navigating like just some dumb stuff that I never actually told my parents who watch this podcast. So I'm not going to talk about the dumb stuff that she was just like, she was basically like, that's dumb. But also I see this call on your life and why don't you lead Cabin devotion tonight? Or, just kind of being comfortable in that mess of like, this girl is still an 8th grader and she has no idea what she's doing. But also I see the work of the Lord in her life. And there have been a lot of people since then who have done that. I think David and Dara Dukeson were super pivotal in that same vein in my life, but that's kind of what I think of when I think of someone unwrapping my grave clothes, is like somehow simultaneously calling out the stench that's still on there and like helping get it off while calling out the life
That's underneath it all.
That's underneath. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
That's good.
Yeah. Gina Gentry. I don't even know if that's your last name anymore, but
What up, Gina?
what up? It's been 25, 26, it's been some years.
You have email now, so she can get a hold of you now without a letter.
Ashley C at hopecityclt.com.
Oh, please trip on this podcast. Please.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Okay, so kind of wrapping up the conversation, but I always want to give you guys the chance. Cutting room floor. Was there anything that did not make it into the message on Sunday that is not going to make it into a future message? I know we're at the very beginning of a series, so you also don't want to be like, here's all this stuff that might be in different messages, but what do you want to?
I've got nothing of seriousness. I've got some really bad examples and ideas and stupid stories in my head, which are better left out, but nothing of seriousness.
No, I mean, I felt really good about the delivery for yesterday, delivery as in a sense of what we put out there and trusting that the power and the authority that was presented is continuing to do its work.
I don't know, man. This is such a heart message for me, which is challenging because they don't always preach the best. When something's kind of like deep grained, I saw myself a million times reading through this passage. I always see myself in Lazarus's place. Like, I know where I sat and the people that called me out. And I pray that I've been faithful to do the same to others, but that's never where I see myself.
Yeah.
And I think that what the Lord's been challenging me to say or to just know is like, there's a humility in remembering the grave. Mm-hmm. There is an ignorance in staying there.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think what I would compel people to do is get to the other side of this. Like, we gotta be people that step up. And I think we said it a couple times and everybody said it in their own way. But if we're not doing this, what are we doing? I'm not Tony Robbins. Like, we're not TED Talks. Like, that's not what we do. Like, what the gospel that's been invested in us is created to take what's dead and bring it alive. So I'm tired of people talking about the death in our city and not stepping up to tombs. Like, I'm weighted down by the idea of all the negative conversation about our country, and yet there's a sleeping giant of a church that if we would just flip and take our place, this whole thing changes. And for his glory.
Can I throw a question in here, a legitimate one? Speaking of that, when you started off your comment there, you kind of hit the heaviness and the weight of this. And it immediately struck me because everything about this sermon series, as we're diving into it, is bringing nothing but excitement to me. How do we find that balance between rah, this is exciting, let's go take over the world, and the weight of it that's going, but only through Jesus can this change really happen?
This, I said it preaches tough because it's a heart message, but what it doesn't do is it evokes emotion in almost everyone that has a heartbeat and loves Jesus. Like, the room seemed like it was pulsating with excitement, but I don't believe that's because I don't think this speaks to the nature part of us. I think this speaks to the spirit that's common in all of us. Right? So if you want to speak, the love language of Jesus, it's resurrection language, right? He says it. I came that you would have life and have it to the fullest. It presupposes that people are dead and in need of life. And it also inclinates the idea that he came to bring life. That's it. So when you hit on the purpose of the spirit that's been invested in us, of course we come alive with excitement. I think the hard part is motivating people past an excitement moment and giving them practical tools to do this. So as silly as it sounds, we do a sticky note concept that come to the altar, write down the name of a friend, put it on a sticky note, bring it home with you, spend the next several weeks praying, interceding, investing time, spending time with that person, trying to figure out how you can connect, and then inviting them to a relationship with Jesus. I would love for that to also include an invitation to the church, but at the end of the day, Jesus didn't come to fill churches. He came to make dead people alive. Now, I think the byproduct of that is healthy churches, so hear me when I say that. But to answer your question, across the board, I think that excitement needs to be channeled into practical applications of how I can bring life to dead places. And as simple as it sounds, it first requires, Jesus lays it out. The first thing he does is he prays, right? Sits in front of the tombstone and says, I don't even need to pray this technically because you hear me all the time, but I'm praying this so that the people around us can hear, right? That idea of community. I want to draw everybody into this process. And then the declaration, we have to make the ask. There's got to be good conversation about Jesus in the life of our friends and those who are not even our friends. That death needs to be pulled out. They're not going to trip on resurrection. There needs to be that invitation laid. So to your point, it's one thing to get people excited. It's another one to give them practical tools to accomplish what we feel like God's calling to. So that's how I would answer that.
That's great.
Any other questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I love it when other people have questions most of the time. Where are we headed?
Elijah and the woman from Shunem. And I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but whatever. I got a week to get it right. The Shunammite woman. So there's this incredible story of a wealthy woman who Elijah meets. And I've always loved this story for a couple reasons, but one of the reasons why is she experiences this miracle of a child, and even though her husband was older, and the reason she experienced that that miracle was because she was hospitable to the man of God and created room for him. And then by creating room, the man of God's like, this is amazing. How can I bless you? And even at that point, she's like, no, I'm good. I got everything. But it's the man of God's assistant who's like, you notice that she doesn't have a child and that her husband's already along in age. And so the man of God prays and she has a child. I love so much of this story, and I don't want to preach it right now, but there's a couple times where she makes some statements in here that I think everyone could absolutely relate to. When the man of God's like, you haven't had a child, you're going to have a child. And her first response is, don't get my hopes up. Like, I'm not asking for this. Don't get my hopes up. What I love about this, the picture is, she created room for the miracle worker, not the miracle. Right? So there's this space she creates for this man of God because of his connection to God and the obvious connection to God. She made space for him, but she didn't make space for the miracle. And I think sometimes we get hyper-focused in 2025, specifically in some faith circles, to say, no, you got to make room for the miracle. You got to make room for the miracle.
Yeah.
And we forget that there's a miracle worker.
It's good.
And making space for the miracle worker is different. So I cannot, because this is if yesterday was the death of, or the resurrection of the death that we see around us and others and in ourselves, this is the resurrection of some dead dreams and some dead hopes. And I can't wait for it. It's going to be great.
Be so good.
Yeah.
Well, if you are watching this on Wednesday when it drops, or maybe within a day or two after, I would ask you to keep our guys in prayer. We've got a lot of men. I can't remember, like 60-some people.
It'll be close to that.
Yeah.
Going to the mountains for fight camp. So be praying for them. If you're going, have a great time. We'll be praying for you. And then we'll be all back together on Sunday. You guys will all be really physically tired and spiritually hyped up, and it's going to be great. That will be at 9 and 11:30 at West for the last time, and at 10:15 at North for the last time. And then everything changes in 2 weeks.
And P.S., this Sunday, it's the last time we're doing 3 services where I'll be able to preach at all 3. And it's also the first time that Jessica Lee Hernandez will be preaching alongside me.
So excited.
Yeah. This particular story is a gut message for her, so I can't wait to let her loose. She's already really excited about it.
It's going to be great. We'll see you Sunday.